The axe blade came down at exactly 31 degrees, slicing through bone and sinew in a single devastating blow. In that moment, everything changed for the Longobard warrior, who would later be known only as TUS 380. The world around him exploded into chaos, screaming, blood spraying across the muddy ground, his own voice joining the cacophony as he stared at the stump where his right hand used to be. But this is not a story about death. This is a story about what happened next. 15 centuries later, archaeologists would uncover his bones in northern Italy and discover something that defied everything they thought they knew about medieval medicine and human resilience. Where his right hand should have been, they found an iron knife, secured to his forearm with leather straps and bronze buckles. This wasn't just any prosthetic, this was a weapon. And the evidence written in his very bones revealed that he had worn it, lived with it, and used it for decades. How does a man lose his hand in the 6th century and not only survive, but transform himself into something more dangerous than he was before? The answer lies buried in the microscopic details of his skeleton, in the wear patterns on his teeth, and in the remarkable story of a community that refused to let one of their own fade into oblivion. The blood would have been the first problem, in an era without tourniquets, without proper surgical instruments, without even a basic understanding of sterile technique. A severed forearm meant death within minutes. Survival rates for major amputations may have been as low as 25%. The massive hemorrhaging alone should have drained the life from his body before anyone could react. Yet someone did react. Someone with knowledge, with skill, with the presence of mind to act quickly in the face of catastrophe. Medieval surgical treatises described techniques for controlling bleeding that dated back to Roman texts. Someone in that Longobard warband knew these techniques. Perhaps it was a battle-hardened veteran who had seen this injury before. Perhaps it was their leader, trained in the practical medicine that kept armies alive. Or perhaps it was one of the camp followers, a woman versed in the healing arts that kept communities functioning. Whoever it was, they worked frantically in those first crucial minutes, pressure applied to the wound, cloth torn from garments to bind the stump. Someone would have shouted orders, demanding materials, clearing space, organizing the chaos into purposeful action. This wasn't random luck. This was knowledge applied under pressure, skill demonstrated when it mattered most. But stopping the bleeding was only the beginning. As the immediate crisis passed and the warrior's life stabilized, a new reality began to set in. In a society where a man's worth was measured by his ability to fight, to provide, to defend his family and clan, what use was a one-handed warrior? The Longobards were migrants, conquerors who had travelled nearly 1,000 miles from northern Europe to carve out a kingdom in Italy. They were not gentle farmers, but hard people who had survived through strength and cunning. Archaeological evidence from their burial grounds tells of a society intimately familiar with violence, shields bearing battle damage, skulls bearing weapon marks. In such a world, what place was there for a disabled warrior? The answer reveals something profound about human nature and community bonds that transcends any historical period. They didn't abandon him. They didn't leave him to die or cast him out as useless. Instead, they made a decision that would echo through the centuries. They would help him find a way to remain useful, to maintain his dignity, to continue contributing to the community that defined his identity. The healing process would have been agonizing. Medieval medical knowledge included herbal remedies that could prevent infection and manage pain, but these were crude compared to modern medicine. Day after day, someone would have tended his wound, changed his dressings, brought him food and water when fever left him too weak to care for himself. One can only imagine the long nights when infection threatened to claim what the battle had not. The stump would have swollen, turned angry red, perhaps begun to putrefy despite their best efforts. There would have been moments when death seemed inevitable, when the kindest thing might have been to let him slip away peacefully rather than endure more suffering. But he fought. His bones tell us that much. The orientation of the forearm fracture suggests an angled cut by a single blow. As with other amputation cases reported in literature, this one exhibits both healing and osteoblastic response. The ragged edges of severed bone had slowly smoothed over, growing the thick calluses that marked successful healing. This wasn't a quick recovery. This was months of careful nursing, of patient care, of a community investing its precious resources in one injured man. As the physical healing progressed, a different kind of challenge emerged. Who was he now? For decades, his identity had been bound up in his ability to wield a sword, to draw a bow, to grapple with enemies in hand-to-hand combat. His right hand had been his primary tool, his weapon, his means of expressing his will upon the world. Now it was gone, and with it, everything he had understood about himself. The psychological trauma of amputation is well documented in modern medicine, but imagine facing it without counselling, without support groups, without even a clear understanding of what was happening to your mind. The phantom pain would have been constant. The sensation that his missing hand was still there, still moving, still grasping for weapons that would never again rest in his palm. His companions might have tried to reassure him, to speak of other contributions he could make, other ways to serve. But how do you convince a warrior that he still has value when everything he had trained for, everything he had lived for, now seemed beyond his reach? Yet somewhere in that darkness, an idea began to form. Perhaps it came to him in a moment of rage, staring at the stump and thinking not of what he had lost, but of what he might yet do. Perhaps it emerged from watching his comrades at weapons practice, noting how they moved, how they fought, and wondering if there might be other ways to be dangerous. The idea was radical, unprecedented, perhaps even shocking to those around him. Instead of trying to replace his lost hand with something that mimicked normal function, why not replace it with something better? Why attempt to recreate what nature had provided when he could create something nature never imagined? A knife. Always ready, never dropping, never losing its grip. In close combat, it might be more effective than fingers and flesh. It couldn't be grabbed or twisted, couldn't be weakened by injury or fatigue. It would make every gesture a potential threat, every casual movement a reminder of what he had become. But how do you attach a blade to a human arm? How do you secure it strongly enough for use, but comfortably enough for daily wear? How do you solve the engineering problems that no one had ever faced before? The answer required innovation, experimentation, and probably multiple failures before success. A leather cap to fit over the healed stump. Bronze buckles and leather straps to secure it. An iron blade mounted precisely where his hand had been. Archaeological evidence shows a D-shaped buckle and decomposed organic material, probably leather, found close to the end of the amputated right forearm. The materials were simple, available, functional. No exotic metals or complex mechanisms, just practical engineering applied to an unprecedented problem. The first fitting would have been a moment of truth. Did it stay secure? Was the weight distribution correct? Could he move naturally without the device shifting or causing pain? The early versions probably failed. Too loose, and it would slip during use. Too tight, and it would cut off circulation or cause sores. The balance had to be perfect, but gradually, through trial and error, they got it right. The leather cap distributed pressure evenly across his stump. The strapping system allowed for adjustment based on swelling or activity level. The knife itself was positioned to maximize leverage and control while feeling natural in use. The first time he demonstrated its effectiveness would have been electric. One can imagine the moment when he showed his fellow warriors what he had become. The surprise, the awe, perhaps even a hint of fear in their eyes as they realized that their injured comrade had not become less dangerous. He had become something unprecedented. His dental modification shows considerable wear and smoothing of the occlusal surface, which points to dental use in attaching the prosthesis to the limb. The most intimate detail of his adaptation was written in his teeth. His upper right incisor had been worn down to a smooth, polished surface, from repeatedly biting down on leather straps to tighten his prosthetic. This wasn't occasional use. This was a daily ritual that had permanently altered his body. Imagine the routine. Every morning, securing the leather cap over his stump, threading the straps through their buckles, then gripping the leather with his teeth to pull everything tight. The taste of cured hide, the pressure on his jaw, the gradual building of tension until the device felt like part of his body. This ritual would have marked the beginning of each day, the transformation from vulnerable sleeper to dangerous warrior. The physical changes went deeper than just his teeth. Other indications of how this individual adjusted to his amputated condition includes a slight change in the orientation of the right glenoid fossa surface, and thinning of right humeral cortical bone. His right shoulder joint developed a distinctive C-shaped ridge from regularly positioning his arm at an unusual angle, while tightening the straps with his teeth. His arm bone lost density, 8.88% compared to his left arm, as it adapted to no longer bearing normal loads. His skeleton had literally remodeled itself around his innovation. This wasn't just a man wearing a prosthetic. This was a body that had evolved to integrate a weapon as part of its natural structure. The changes took years to develop, revealing just how long he had lived with and perfected his adaptation. But what did this transformation mean for his place in society? How did his fellow warriors react to this unprecedented hybrid of man and weapon? In a culture that valued martial prowess above all else, had he elevated his status or marked himself as something alien and disturbing? The evidence suggests the former. His burial showed the same respect accorded to other warriors, with his prosthetic carefully placed for the afterlife. He hadn't been relegated to the margins of society or treated as a curiosity. Instead, he appears to have maintained his position within the warrior community, perhaps even enhanced it. Think about the psychological effect his appearance would have had on enemies. A man with a blade for a hand was something from nightmares, a figure that violated natural order and suggested supernatural power. In an age when battles were often decided by morale and intimidation as much as skill, his very presence might have been worth a dozen normal warriors. His own confidence would have grown with each successful use of his prosthetic. The first time he effectively employed it in combat, the first time an enemy recoiled in shock and fear, the first time his fellow warriors looked at him with something approaching awe rather than pity, these moments would have rebuilt his identity on new foundations. He was no longer the warrior who had lost his hand. He was the warrior who had gained something no one else possessed. He was unique, unprecedented, perhaps even legendary within his own lifetime. Children would have stared in fascination. Adults would have whispered stories about his transformation. Enemies would have spoken his name with a mixture of fear and respect. The daily practicalities of his adaptation reveal the full extent of his integration with the prosthetic. The round-shaped callus on both bones, along with the osteophytes, suggest that there may have been a biomechanical force placed on the stump. The pressure of regular use had stimulated bone growth, creating the structural support needed for effective function. How did he manage the countless small tasks that require two functional hands? These challenges would have demanded constant problem-solving, the development of new techniques and strategies for accomplishing familiar tasks with an unfamiliar body. Did his left hand become extraordinarily dexterous, trained to perform functions normally shared between both hands? Or he developed tools and techniques for accomplishing two-handed tasks with his unique combination of flesh and steel? His community might have adapted around him, with others automatically providing assistance when needed without making him feel helpless or dependent. The social dynamics of his situation would have been complex and constantly evolving. If he had a family, wife, children, siblings, they would have needed to adjust their expectations and behaviors. His role within the household might have changed, but the evidence suggests he remained a full participant in community life, rather than becoming an invalid or dependent. Fellow warriors would have had to recalibrate their understanding of what made someone effective in combat. His presence challenged conventional wisdom about disability and capability. He was living proof that limitations could be transformed into advantages, that innovation could triumph over circumstance. The crafting and maintenance of his prosthetic would have required ongoing collaboration with skilled artisans. Leather components would wear out and need replacement. Metal parts might need adjustment or repair. The knowledge of how to create and maintain his device would have spread through the community, potentially inspiring others to think differently about adapting to physical challenges. As word of his transformation spread beyond his immediate community, his reputation would have grown. Other Longobard settlements would have heard stories of the warrior who replaced his hand with a blade. The years of his adaptation were also years of the Longobard Expansion into Italy. By 572 they had conquered all of northern Italy, setting up the Kingdom of the Lombards. His personal transformation paralleled his people's transformation from migrants to conquerors, from outsiders to rulers. He had remade himself just as his nation was remaking the political landscape of post-Roman Europe. The man died between the ages of 40 and 50, which was actually a respectable lifespan for a medieval warrior. He had survived not just his catastrophic injury, but the dangerous years that followed, living long enough to see his adaptation become routine, his innovation become accepted, his transformation become complete. When death finally came, it found him still in possession of his unique identity. He had been placed in the grave, with his right arm bent at the elbow and laid across his torso. Even in death, his knife hand remained part of who he was, carefully positioned for whatever battles might await in the afterlife. Modern prosthetic users facing similar challenges find inspiration in his medieval solution. His approach of embracing enhancement rather than merely seeking replacement resonates with current debates about human augmentation and the future of assistive technology. The knife-handed warrior's legacy lives on in every amputee who refuses to accept limitations, every community that rallies around its most vulnerable members, every innovator who dares to imagine new possibilities. His transformation from victim to legend reminds us that human potential cannot be measured by physical wholeness alone. From his grave in northern Italy, TUS 380 continues to challenge our assumptions about disability, innovation, and human resilience. his story written in bone and metal, leather and bronze, speaks across the centuries to remind us that the human spirit's capacity for adaptation knows no bounds. In losing his hand, he found something greater, a new identity, a unique capability, and a place in history that no intact warrior could claim. The axe that took his hand thought it was ending his story. Instead, it was beginning a legend that would outlive empires and inspire generations. Sometimes the greatest transformations emerge from the deepest wounds, and sometimes the most powerful innovations are born from the most devastating losses. The knife-handed warrior understood this truth 15 centuries ago, and his bones still whisper its wisdom to anyone brave enough to listen.